Hey guys, Harv here, and welcome back to Space Tourism, the Kerbal space program show where we do space tourism. Yes! This is the series in which we take expensive, or we take rich Kerbals and put them on expensive holidays. And today we are trying to get down, or develop a chain to get down from in orbit around Lave to down to the surface. And we have a few ideas on how to do this. Previously, in the last episode, I said, oh, maybe we can take this thing, this particular crew transport vessel we have here, and actually use that as a lander. Because it's been a bit surplus to requirements recently, so we'll have to find some use for it, surely. And it is just possible that if it's not too heavy, we could use 2 nuclear engines to get off of Lave. Seems unthinkable, but when you remember this is Lave, then it seems a bit more plausible. Thinner atmosphere, less gravity, you know, smaller mass I should say. And so it does seem as if that's a possibility. And we're going to find out. We're going to test it. We have to test it. So, first thing we're going to do, we're going to take it from its previous... what's the word? When it's not symmetrical? Asymmetrical, there we go. Previous asymmetrical docking position. Take it from there, put it on the front so that we can actually burn using the engines. Not the engines on this, the engines on this thing over here. And the first thing to do is to change the inclination, because our orbit around Lave, as you can see right now, is fairly inclined. And sure, that's not a problem for landing. Even for landing at a target, it's not necessarily a problem. But from getting from the target back up into orbit, it's a hell of a lot easier just to go to 90 degrees, rather than having to worry about an offset. Much easier just to dock along the equator. But anyway, look at that sight. That is a view, isn't it? Absolutely. Whether it's a good one or a bad one, I don't know. Thumbnails. I wonder if I should pay more effort to thumbnails. Nah. So we're burning, we're changing our inclination right now. It's not going to be perfectly along the equator, but as I've said, just the closer you can get it, the generally easier time you'll have docking. And if this doesn't work, in the crazy event that this particular design using this crew transport as a supply chain up and down from Lave does not work, we'll have to develop an ulterior solution. And what will that be, you might ask? Well, SSTOs are notoriously good at getting in orbit, and it's always a good idea to use an SSTO in the event of you having an actual oxygen atmosphere. I shouldn't really call it SSTO, I'm kind of banding things into one group there. Air-breathing engines. Air-breathing engines are a good thing, like Sabre, you know, those kind of engines. Point 23, I've had inside knowledge that says there are going to be similar functions to Sabre added to the game. Similar, if not exactly the same. But I'm not entirely sure how much I'm supposed to be talking about, so I won't. Just a note, there won't actually be any pre-release footage coming from me this time round. Not because I don't have access to point 23, I do, but because I've decided not to. I have mock exams in the next 2 weeks, depending on whenever this gets uploaded. So I really can't afford to spend the time playing KSP when I ought to be doing my mock exams. But you know, I'm making this video right now, so I'm obviously not going to follow that. Oh well. Back to the video. We've come down, we've deorbited somewhat, and we are now plummeting at several thousand meters per second down towards the surface of the planet. Using time acceleration, this is actually 4 times the proper speed, because this... No, this isn't sped up, is it? This footage is not sped up. I usually speed it up. Huh. Oh well. There's the base below us. I seem to have overshot somewhat as we go sailing right past us, and unfortunately I chose the worst place to build on, didn't I? The worst place to put a base. Too far to the east, you've got ocean. Too far to the west, you've got a lake. By God, man. Why on earth did I put it here? Yes, and it's a very narrow band that's quite mountainous as well, very hilly, as we learnt in previous episodes. No, the matter, none the matter. The matter right now, of course, being that, is this thing even capable of lifting its own weight? The answer? No. Definitely not. We've detached, opened parachute, swapped to it, and it explodes immediately. Because it does not have the thrust sufficient to lift its own weight. Okay, it might be able to slightly lift itself off the ground if the tank was empty, but it wasn't and it didn't. So, yeah, quick load back. and we have it up in orbit. So we'll be able to use it for transferring between stations, I suppose, in orbit, but certainly not for going down on the ground. So we need to develop something that can be down on the ground, namely this. No, actually not this, because you'll see how this performs in just a second. But what I did was I went back to the VAB and thought, okay, we've got one SSTO that will take us up from Kerbin to Kerbin orbit. We probably want to develop a different SSTO for going on lathe, and there's a few good reasons why this is the case. You know, developing things to specification is always better than just converting something else, unless that something else you have works, and whatever you're going to develop won't. This looks to be... oh, no, maybe not. Okay. Yeah, center of mass way too far back. The issue being, I want to be able to get this into orbit, and I want it to be able to dock with a single, you know, dock quite easily. So I want to have an engine on the back, or a docking port on the back, that will allow attachment beneath it. So you can see this is version 2 of whatever I'm developing. Looks remarkably like the Ares 4A? One of the stock planes, at any rate. You know, with the engine at the back and the 2 air-breathing engines on the side. It does look quite a bit like that. And I'm thinking, ooh, okay, this may be a better alternative. This one fulfills the idea that you can stack things beneath it, put it on a launch stage, take it to wherever you want it to go. And it does have air-breathing engines, it does have intakes, it should be able to function well on lathe. And as a plane, it flies pretty damn well, if I do say so myself. We shall see some footage of that in just a moment. Unfortunately, that's not the problem. The problem here is that I've built it with insufficient fuel. It's not to spec, it is far too... In fact, just to prove how little fuel it really has, you remember the SSTO that we had on lathe? Or not the SSTO, you remember the plane that we had on lathe? The one which dropped Jebediah Kerman off and then proceeded to lose all its energy generation. That one. Its fuel supply was made up of one 2-meter tank in the centre, and an equivalent of one half tank spread both either side, of liquid and oxidizer fuel. This one has less than that in terms of oxidizer. I don't think this would have enough fuel. I mean, I don't know, because I haven't actually tested it. I haven't even tried doing SSTO on Kerbin, which is harder, so if it gets anywhere near that, then it would certainly work on lathe. But I don't think it would have the fuel. So despite the fact it can fly well, sadly, I'm going to revert to what I know. And perhaps not sadly, perhaps the passenger SSTO Light Mark II is just too good to be kept off of this chance. Matska Kerman was not in the cockpit in the previous episode? I'm being told? Apparently Matska Kerman was not actually flying the SSTO in one of the previous episodes. Which was a mistake, he must have been posing as someone else, surely. Because no one, except for Matska Kerman, can fly the SSTO sufficiently well to actually get it into orbit, that is. So it must have been a mistake. So we'll have to make sure, definitely make sure, that whenever this thing flies, it has to be Matska Kerman. You may argue, why don't we just train other Kerbals to fly this SSTO? The reason being, this thing is so fiendishly difficult to fly that would be futile and an awful waste of resources. We'd much rather spend our space program's fundings on important things like Kerbal cannons and jet skis for lathe than actually training any pilots. Turns out Matska Kerman actually built the thing himself, which is why he's the only one who can actually fly it. Anyway, this SSTO, you may be wondering, well, hang on. This thing does not fulfill your specification. It does not have an engine on the back that can be, you know, loaded onto a launch stage. Plus, it doesn't have any decent docking port capability. They're both the double ones. Well, this may be true. However, as for not being able to stack any launch pad or launch stage underneath it, I think I found a way around that. And as for, well, it doesn't have sufficient docking ports, it does. It has plenty of docking ports. Sure, they're not along the centre, but does that matter? In fact, why don't we just build our stations to spec for that? Anyway, some of you may have twigged on to what's going on here, but we'll see. Using the mystique, the mystical, the power, the supercalifragilisticexpialidocious nature of my what's the word? Psychic telekinetic powers, I've managed to levitate this thing over here. Don't ask how. Using RCS thrusters, obviously, if you were to ask. But you didn't, so that's fine. Using RCS thrusters, I move this weird fuel tank assembly that I've constructed, and I'm now going to place it over here with a bit of a twirl and a check for the map view apparently. There we go, crashed onto the floor, nothing to see here, move along. And I'm going to see whether I can dock this on top of my conveniently placed SSTO. Why? What's gonna be achieved by doing this, Harvey? I should think it might be quite obvious, but I'll explain it anyhow. We have a single stage to orbit here. A single stage to orbit. The orbit pit is what we're interested in, the fact that it can actually get itself up into orbit. So having said that, why can't it go from there to Jool? We could, we could just refuel it in space, as we have done many times before, and then from there just send it over and fly it on its way. Well, we can't really do that because it doesn't have sufficient fuel capacity. Oh, I see what you've done, Harvey. You've ramped up the fuel capacity, haven't you? Yes. Yes, I have. And it's never actually going to fly like this. A, it's not going to fly in atmosphere like this, and B, it's not going to fly with just one. Because as you can see from burning, it makes you tilt upwards like this. So we have to have two. We have to have two, slot them on the underside whenever we get up into space. So we get up into space with the SSTO, dock to the station, and then slot these things onto the SSTO to equip it, to give it what it needs, that extra bit of fuel capacity to send it out to Lathe under its own power. Which should work fantastically well. There's one flaw! And this flaw shall hopefully be resolved in the next episode, and that is, I have no idea whether that will actually be enough fuel capacity to get it to Jool. I certainly hope. In the event it isn't, we can always just stack more on. These fuel tank, fuel supply, reserve, whatever I'm calling them, are actually modular. So they can be stacked onto one another. I can expand it infinitely. I could have a skyscraper with two wings right in the centre and one aerospike engine if I needed to. It probably won't get to that point. Aerospikes are fairly efficient in vacuum. More efficient than they are in the air, aren't they? I think it's 380 ISP at sea level and 390 ISP in vacuum. Something like that, and this means that it has sufficient efficiency to use quite, not too much fuel, and still get to the target destination. And that's all well and good, but this video will have to end shortly, because there's not an awful lot of footage. This is actually the second journey made by this particular ship. I strapped the fuel reserve onto a rocket, send it up, and I've got this extra little docking tug kind of thing along there with it, just for the ride, It might actually be able to dock by itself, but it wouldn't be able to get into orbit by itself, because the SSTO, the launch stage, wouldn't be able to do that. And one other thing to mention before I kind of clear up, this method, what you've seen me do right now, hasn't been cut up that much. I launched, I was about to get into orbit when I saw that I timed it quite well, and then I just burnt straight for the space station. So instead of actually getting into orbit and then rendezvousing, I just burnt, excuse me, sorry. My throat has been a bit croaky, as you may have noticed. Yeah, so I burnt straight for the space station. I did a one-take rendezvous, rather than going around the planet a few times, and getting closer progressively. And that was all well and good. I want to do that more in the future, because it takes so much less time. And there's something I'm intending to do in the future as well, which might be quite interesting, which it will be very important for, but I'll leave you wondering what that is. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Space Tourism, and I shall see you all next time.